Chef, we explore the path of leftover rice once more, starting with a simple stir-fry featuring marinated vegetables. Next is a classic Italian wedding soup with fresh kale. And lastly, for dessert, an Indian take on a bread pudding. So why don't you pull up a chair and dine with me? Welcome back to the kitchen, everyone. Today is leftover rice day. And I know I did some dishes before with some leftover Spanish rice. This time it's white rice. And I'm doing a few different options here. We're starting with a vegetable stir fry. Now what I'm going to do a little different here, I'm going to marinate my vegetables and then cook them in the wok with the leftover rice. So I'm going to start here with some soy sauce. I'm going to do a couple tablespoons of soy sauce. A couple tablespoons of soy sauce. This is going to give us our salt. It's going to give us that kind of classic Asian flavors. I've got some pure sesame oil here. I'm going to do about a teaspoon of that. That's strong. We don't need as much of that. We're going to do about 1/8 teaspoon of this chili paste, just to give a little heat, a little presence, not too much. Same here with the ginger. This is just some minced ginger. I'm going to do about 1/4 teaspoon of that, and then I've got some minced garlic here. I'm going to do, again, about 1/4 teaspoon of the minced garlic. I know the soy sauce has some salt in it, but I'm going to just add a little for the sake of the vegetables. It's going to help it cook down. And a little pepper here. Give this a little whisk. Now for some sweetness, I've got a little honey here. I'm going to throw in about a tablespoon of honey. A little honey, and for some acidity, I'm going to also do a couple teaspoons of lemon juice here. And that is going to be the dressing for our vegetables. I'm just going to whisk this together. And I'm going to toss my vegetables in here before I throw them in the skillet. And that skillet is nice and hot. I can feel it. You just gently rest your hand over top of the skillet and you can feel that heat coming off. So I'm going to come in here with this. This is sugar snap peas. I've got some broccoli, some carrots, some sprouts. Just a nice little mix of everything. I'm going to grab my tongs and just give this a nice turn. When we cook it in the wok too, that's really going to help get these flavors together as well, but I just want to kind of give this a good stir and let it marinate. Turn this baby down a little. One thing about the wok, it will get nice and hot, so you want to be careful you don't let it get too hot. Your vegetables are going to burn. Give this a nice little stir. I'm going to break up some of this broccoli, some big pieces of broccoli in here. I want everything to be roughly the same size so it all cooks the same. Okay, that looks pretty good. You can smell those flavors, the garlic, the ginger, even some of that heat is coming through as I work this in. It's going to be absolutely delicious. Alright, I'm going to throw just a little more oil in here to be on the safe side. I've got my rice here waiting in the wings. And my vegetables are ready to go in. Now this rice is already cooked. We just need to reheat it. It's not going to take too long. So I'm going to do my vegetables first. Let them get a nice sear. They're going to get nice and crisp. And that dressing is going to cook and release more of those delicious flavors we just cooked up. Alright. I've got my spoon here. We're just going to give this a nice stir. You want to be quick and stir this. You don't want your sauce to burn. We've got that garlic and that ginger in there, and that cooks quick. So you want to just make sure you keep stirring this. Sometimes you can just do the pan like this. If you're real good, you go back and forth. What's great about this pan is it has a nice lip to it. So you can almost kind of just stir everything in here. You don't have to worry about it spilling out. And that's pretty good. I'm just going to let it go for a little while. I don't want the vegetables to... I'm not sweating these vegetables. I don't want them to like cook down and get mush. I just want some heat to them. I still want them to maintain their crunch. And as this cooks down, you can smell that soy, the ginger, that heat. It's just filling the room with delicious aromas. And cooking it down like this just adds another layer of flavor, and you can see everything's getting a little, starting to tenderize a little. We don't want them to get too done, just done enough. And that's why I broke up this broccoli so it would cook at the same time as everything else. Alright, those vegetables are getting nice and tender. I'm going to go ahead and throw this rice in. Pop that down on top. I'm going to go ahead and turn this down. That rice is already cooked. We just want to reheat it. So the residual heat that I've got in this pan here I think is going to be good. And I'm just going to give it a little stir. What's nice about the pre-cooked rice, it kind of has that sticky quality where all the starches have released, and it's going to pick up our sauce nicely. You can already see it's changing color. Our rice is absorbing that sauce. And I kind of like to stir it in. I could have reheated the rice and set this on top, but I kind of like it better this way. Everything together in one bite. And the rice is already cooked, so really we just need to reheat it. And the residual heat from our pan here is going to be good for that. And you can see these vegetables, they've cooked down a little. They still got a little crunch to them now. They're going to be pretty good here. And I think we are ready to go. Alright, time for a bowl and a spoon. Take this off the heat. Alright, we're going to give this a little taste. Get my tongs back out. I'm just going to pull some of this out here. Okay. Now normally you would eat these with chopsticks, but we're going to rough it today. I've just got a spoon here. I'm going to come in and get some of this. Got my rice here. I've got some sprouts. Piece of the pea. Smells heavenly. It's good. You get some acidity from the lemon. Gives some brightness to the dish. The sesame oil, you get a little heat from the chili paste. And that rice just soaks it up like a sponge. You bite into that rice and you just get all those flavors. The vegetables, they're nice and tender, but they still have a little crunch to them, which is exactly how I like them in a stir fry. Absolutely delicious. So up next is going to be Italian wedding soup. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the kitchen, guys. I'm just dicing up an onion here because we're moving on to my next dish, and that is Italian wedding soup. And this is going to be another perfect vehicle for our leftover rice, because this is a soup that has rice in it, and meatballs, some kale. It's going to be really good. Now, I'm not sure exactly why they call it an Italian wedding soup. I know it's not really an Italian soup. I do know it was a staple at weddings at one point. During the Depression, lots of soups and stews were really popular because it was a great way to stretch out what little meat you had. Because what's different about this soup is you have little meatballs in it. And then you stretch it out with the rice and the broth, which is very inexpensive. So I'm just chopping up one large onion here. Okay, that is going to go into my pot here that I've already got warming up with a few tablespoons of oil. I'm just going to drop that right in. And that is starting to sizzle nicely. Alright, I'm just going to throw a little salt in here. About a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of pepper, and I'm going to give that a little stir. And just kind of let these sweat down. The oil is going to crisp these nicely. And the salt, it's going to release the moisture from these onions so they really get nice and tender. Just give that a little stir. While I'm waiting on those, I'm going to move on to my meatballs. So I'm going to do about half ground beef, and I've got some Italian sausage there as well. And this is just 1 pound of each. Now I like to use different kinds of pork when I'm doing meatballs or meatloaf or anything like that. But I figured since we're doing the wedding soup, I'll go with an Italian sausage. It's got a lot of seasonings in there for you already. To that, 1 egg. About a cup of breadcrumbs. That's our binder that's going to hold this together. And I'm using Italian seasoned breadcrumbs. And then for a little extra flavor here, about a teaspoon of onion powder, teaspoon of garlic powder, and about half a teaspoon of Italian seasoning, just to really bring out those Italian flavors in the sausage. And then we're just going to come in here with clean hands and we're just going to mash this together. Make sure that egg gets broke up in here, because the egg and the breadcrumb is what's going to hold this together. You want to make sure you mix this really well, so each bite you get a little of the sausage and a little of the ground beef. Always rinse your hands off when you're working with raw meat to avoid cross-contamination. Let's set this guy aside. Okay, these onions are looking pretty good. I'm throwing some garlic now. I always like to wait to do my garlic because it cooks a lot quicker than the onions do, and it'll burn before your onions are finished. So I'm going to throw in a tablespoon of garlic there. I love using fresh garlic. It's very aromatic. And the minced I like because you don't have those big pieces. Because garlic can be kind of spicy when you bite into it, especially raw garlic. So I like the minced because it's not as abrasive. Alright, now I've got a little scoop here for my meatballs. So I'm going to be doing a little bit smaller meatballs than I would normally do at any other time. And that's just because this is an accompaniment to our soup. So I don't want them to be too big. So it's between like pail size, golf ball size, so a little, not too small, a little on the smaller side though. Now I'm just going to plop these in our pan here. And I'm going to just let them sear on both sides before I add the rest of my ingredients here. Alright, the meatballs are just about cooked through. I'm going to let them finish off in the pan here. I'm going to go ahead and add my chicken stock here. You can use any kind of stock you like. I just like chicken stock with this. It's what I'm familiar with. So I'm going to add this whole container here. Add one container here, and just wait for that to come to a boil, and we'll finish it off with my kale and my rice. Stay tuned. Alright, these have been going for a little bit. We're just going to give them a little turn here, and you can see they're getting a nice crust on them. Exactly what I want. So I like to play on textures, but also, you know, when we add the broth, we want something that's going to kind of hold up to that. Alright, our soup is simmering away. I'm just going to move on here to my kale. This is about half a pound of kale, and I'm just going to give it a rough chop. Now the kale, it's going to cook down in this soup. It's going to get nice and soft and tender. This looks like a lot, I know, but it's really going to cook down and kind of shrink. I'm going to go ahead and throw this in while it's at a simmer here. Just a nice rough chop. I kind of like nice big rustic pieces because, like I said, it's going to cook down. And what I like, this is going to give our soup some nice color and some nice texture. The kale, it's also good for you. I'm just going to dump this right in. Give this a nice stir. I want it to get down in here. Break some of this up. Get down in here into this broth and just get nice and tender. I don't want it too soft because I kind of like the play on textures from the crunch of the kale, but I do want it to be cooked. I'm just going to stir this in. Yum. Put our lid back on. I've got my rice here. I'm going to do about a cup and a half of rice. I'm going to save the rest for our dessert. And I know this rice looks kind of sticky right now. Rice doesn't usually keep too well because it likes to kind of clump together when you hold on to it. But it's going to break down into our soup and it'll be just fine. So I'm going to set that aside. And we will add that last. The rice is already cooked, so we just need to reheat it. Alright, our soup is boiling away. And that kale has shrunk just like I said, and I'm going to go ahead and throw this rice in. Just dump the whole thing in. And I'm just going to take my spoon here and break this rice up. This broth is pretty hot, so it's not going to take our rice long. And it's already cooked. I don't want to overcook it. So I'm just throwing it in last minute. And this looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and have a little taste. I've already got my spoon in my bowl. We'll switch here to my ladle. I'm going to set this guy down and let it rest. And here we are. A fast take on a Italian wedding soup with pre-made rice. Come in here and give a nice bite here. Get some of that kale. It is hot. Very good. Get some salt from the broth. Plays nicely with the kale, which doesn't have much flavor to it. So you throwing it in the soup and letting it cook down in the soup, I love, because it really imparts those flavors onto the kale. And then you've got the rice. The rice is nice and tender. And the meatballs. Very delicious, quick, easy and filling soup. Absolutely delicious. So lastly, on our leftover rice journey, it's going to be a rice pudding, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the kitchen. So far we have done an Italian wedding soup and a vegetable stir fry. And I thought it would be fun to do a dessert, so it's going to be rice pudding. You always think about rice as either a vehicle for a dish or some kind of like savory component, but you never think about it as dessert. And rice pudding is just one of those classic desserts. And what's great about it is, you know, rice is pretty much a blank canvas, so you can kind of go in any direction you want. So I'm going with a little Indian flair. Rice pudding is kind of like a big Indian dessert, and I've just got a few things here. So in this pan, I've got my milk going. It's about 1.5 cups, and I'm going to let this reduce a little bit because our rice is already cooked. This is leftover rice after all. So I don't need a whole lot of liquid, but I need this milk nice and hot to get our rice where we want it. So I'm going to start with some vanilla. I'm going to do about a teaspoon of good vanilla. I've also got some cinnamon here. I'm going to do about a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. Nutmeg. I'm going to do about a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Nutmeg's a little strong, so we don't need a whole lot of that. And just to really bring this home, I've got some Gram Marsala here. Now this is usually a spice that's used for like Indian curries and stews, butter chicken, tikka masala, things like that. But I thought it would be fun little ingredient here to just do a little of this. We're going to do about a 1/4 teaspoon of that as well. And then I'm going to give this a little whisk. Once the milk gets nice and hot, you want to turn it off. And then I'm just going to give this a little whisk. Incorporate all these flavors here. What's great about the Gram Marsala, it's going to give it a little earthiness, a little heat, so it's not overly sweet. And I'm just going to let that continue to go. I've got some sugar here, because this is a dessert, so we need a little sweetness. So I'm going to be doing about a half cup of sugar. And again, we want to give this a nice whisk. And as this milk continues to steam, you want to get it to where it's just about to boil. And then we will add our rice. And it is looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and dump in this rice. Voila. And break this rice up. And we're not using as much liquid as you would normally use for rice because, again, our rice is already cooked. So I'm just going to break this rice down into our liquid here. And just cook this long enough for our rice to come up to temp, more or less. And I'm just going to kind of whisk this together. It's already smelling heavenly. And just break this rice up because it has kind of clumped together as it was chilling in the fridge. Now that's just going to simmer on low for a few minutes till that rice comes up to temp and the rest of that liquid continues to cook down. Alright, I've got a bowl here. And lastly, I just want to finish this off with just a little salt. I love salts in desserts. It kind of breaks through that sweetness. You get a nice play on flavors. Okay, turn this guy off. Let's see here. I'm just going to grab a spoon. Now the last thing I have here is a little, sort of a trail mix. There's some almonds in here, and I've got some dried cranberries and some dried mangoes. And I thought that would be a fun little addition. It's going to give a little body here to this. And just add a little oomph. And then you get some protein from the nuts, and the dried fruit is going to add a nice little sweetness. Okay, so pull this off the heat. I've got my bowl out, and I'm just going to go ahead and spoon some of this up. And here we are, a delicious rice pudding. Let's dig in. Oh yeah. Nice. What I like about rice pudding is that opposed to like a traditional pudding, you get that nice kind of texture from the rice, so it just kind of gives you something a little different. You get that sweetness from the sugar, but then you've got those warming spices that kind of hit the back of your throat. The cinnamon, the nutmeg, the masala, harmonious together. Then you get those bits of sweetness from the cran raisins and that crunch of the almonds. Absolutely delicious. And a quick and easy way to reuse our leftover rice. So once again, you have been dining with the Sartorial Chef.